Hello and welcome back to the Gamesindustry.biz Investment Summit at MEGAMIGS, presented by Investissement Québec International and partnered with Red Barrels, Stadia, Square Enix, Ubisoft and the City of Montreal. Our final session is with Cassia Curran, advisor at Wings Interactive, a fund that invests in games by female game developers and diverse teams. Cassia previously worked in business development at Jagex in Cambridge and for NetEase in Hangzhou in China. She's also a good friend of the Investment Summit, having previously recorded a fantastic talk on how indie games companies can research the market, which is available on the Gamesindustry.biz YouTube channel. So, Cassia, welcome back to the Investment Summit.
Thank you, Jamie. It's great to be back.
Yeah, good stuff. Just a reminder to everyone watching, you can ask questions via the MEGAMIGS Pine chat channel, and I'll put those to Cassia a little later. But firstly, Cassia, just tell us a little bit more about your role at Wings and your mission, really.
Sure thing. So Wings is a microfund that invests in games by diverse teams, particularly focusing on teams which has good representation in terms of women, people of marginalized gender. The kind of games that Wings typically invests in typically are PC and console games. We're looking on the more the indie side. We do project fundings rather than equity finance. Project funding being on the lower end of the scale, the cap being $500,000. We've done various investments so far this year, including games like Later Datas. Our focus on what makes us different from other project finance funds and other diversity funds is that we have a board of successful female game developers who are the key decision makers in terms of deciding which investments Wings is going to make.
No, that's fantastic. And I mean, in the situation that we're in COVID, it must be extra difficult to get those diverse teams and those games from women developers. Is it more difficult in this situation because we're not in conferences where we can sort of chat to each other and meet each other face to face? So is it more difficult to find those new teams and those interesting games?
Conversely, it's a lot easier for connections to happen. I think actually the fact that that not just Wings, but investors generally are accessible online actually decreases a lot of the barriers. So a big barrier for attending a conference to meet investors is like plane travel, it's hotel fees, that's just the extra expense that people from marginalized backgrounds often have a bit of a harder time with. Also, when it comes to networking in the games industry, it's often quite like booze driven. It can feel quite unsafe for women in particular. And having everything online just means that you can almost do things anonymously, and your games, your prototypes, your games and pitches are sort of judged much more upon the game itself rather than who you are as a team or a person, which is fine when it comes to publishing project finance.
Yes, that's certainly some of the feedback we got from our first investment summit back in May, which you took part in, from female developers based around the world. It did give them access to funders and investors, and it was easier to do that. So events like this one, they're so important, aren't they, at this time, to kind of make those connections?
Yes, they really can be. But actually, because Wings in particular are investment decisions are largely done by our board of successful female game developers who have to meet every now and then. We end up having just requesting lots of pitches through our website, wingsfund.me. And that for us, that means it's really, really accessible to absolutely any company anywhere in the world. So for us, I think that these kind of summits are very useful for just getting the word about the fact that we exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the themes that's come out of the last few sessions is how positive it is, which is it's really good actually. Because I was posing the question, like things are more difficult, and surely people aren't investing as much. Everyone's saying no, actually, there's more investment going in and there's stuff happening, which is really positive, I think, and it certainly hasn't slowed yourselves and Wings from investing either.
No, it's been, I think from a due diligence perspective, it's a little bit more tricky because you can't go and fly and visit the team very easily. But there's so many teams now that are just remotely based anyway. That often that's becoming more and more meaningless in the games industry. I think for indie game side, it makes so much sense for teams to be almost like entirely remote. I think for AAA studios, it's just more challenging because, for example, mocap needs to be done in person. But games have been very, very lucky with the pandemic. Firstly, because we haven't been disrupted in so significantly like our competitors in other competitors in the entertainment industry, such as TV and movies, where production has been very impacted. We've not been so impacted in terms of distribution as well. Cinema films have had cinemas shut down all over the world.
That's right.
And now there's also, of course, increased demand for home entertainment. And I think a really interesting trend just recently has been the recent streamer successes of multiplayer indie games. So there's so examples of that is, of course, Among Us, Fall Guys, Phasmophobia, that have been made by all these independent teams, and they are actually beating out quite like the multiplayer games by massive companies such as Amazon. Interestingly enough, but clearly there is a huge amount of demand for people to connect with each other, and this is what multiplayer games in particular are offering these days.
Yeah, because at the previous panel I was asking, are you being inundated by Fall Guys pitches at the moment, or are you seeing a lot of I mean, the thing is, it doesn't have to be obviously a clone, but the fact that there is these very successful, small budget indie or smaller budget AAA games like Fall Guys that have done extremely well. So, are you looking at games like that for Wings?
So yes, I mean, I think I think that one issue with multiplayer games is that they can be there can be a lot of technical challenges. There can be like cheating issues, and often you need you need to have a player base from the get-go, and not have that very long waiting times. So and there's community issues. There's lots and lots of challenges for indie teams compared to a premium title, compared to a single player title. But yeah, it's obviously something that players are now looking for more of and have interest in.
Yeah, good stuff. From the point of view of an investor, what are the sort of gaps in funding at the moment? I mean, obviously with Wings, you come in at a certain price. What were you saying? Certain limits of 500,000. Do you think there's other areas that could be? I think there's a real gap certainly for diverse teams as well.
For prototype funding. So Wings, Wings and most investors will only look at games once there's a prototype, and the reason for this is because well, there's two reasons. Like, firstly, it's really hard to judge what a game is going to be like before there's a prototype. You might have a really awesome idea, but sometimes like awesome ideas aren't actually that fun to play. You need to have like a prototype to really work out whether it's going to be fun to play. And the second reason is that there's so many game studios pitching. It almost like what doesn't make sense to fund a game that like you have so many games with prototypes pitching that does not make much sense investing in games which don't have a prototype. But that is like a real barrier to entry for a lot of developers from marginalized backgrounds who just don't have the spare time or money to make to get to prototype stage. So there's very, very few investors that will do that. So like Humble Bundle, there's like the Galaxy Fund that does a little for marginalized developers. There's like Ontario government also has like a prototype fund.
Yeah, we've got UK Games Fund.
Yeah, UK Games Fund as well.
Which is very good, yeah.
But they tend to, like, I would say from like a investor point of view, it's so risky. It generally doesn't make a lot of sense to invest in games prior to prototype. So that is like a significant gap in the market.
Are there things that those individuals or those teams can do then that would increase their chances of getting funding and investment if they don't have a prototype? Could they create something, rough and ready in, one of the free engines that are available and things like that? Are there ways that they can do it?
Yeah, I think it often depends upon your ultimate vision for the game. People ask me quite often, like, what should be in the prototype? Like, what do you need to see in the prototype?
We've heard that vision quite a lot,
Yes.
about that how important that is for when you're pitching to investors and funders.
Yeah, I think it really depends upon what's special about your game. So, like, if you're doing a narrative game, you really want, like, the prototype should show like the beginnings and of like an amazing story and have like the story all kind of mapped out, and from that we can kind of judge where you're going. If it's like your game is based upon a specific innovative mechanic, then we don't really need to necessarily see great art, but we want to see if the innovative mechanic is really fun. You basically just need to, if you don't have that much money or time, stripping it down, or just building to the point, building up the areas where you think your game, or proving out the areas where you think your game is going to be special, is what you really need to do.
Yeah,
on. So rather than making like an entire vertical slice, is I think is unnecessary.
I've heard a few companies before say how important like a visual style is and having an impact visually. Is that something that they could perhaps do as well and say, look, this is our vision. Here's here's some pieces of art that we reckon we want the game to look like.
Yeah, I think we've seen games have been doing very successfully recently. Have had there's been a trend where they've had like original stunning art styles that look different from everything else on the market. So Cuphead, I think, was like is a really obvious example of that. So like in some cases, it's possible for us to do an investment when that you have to have really great art style, and your game mechanic is proven out really fun, and which artist you're going to work with once you get investment and you have a portfolio and like commitment. That is possible.
And obviously you could help as well. So if you're talking with a games company that needs an interesting art style, I'm sure that you would have connections and people that you could recommend that could help.
Oh, Wings has a database of all the different types of if you need like localized, because we're not a publisher, we do project funding, so we have like a database of like localization marketing agencies, localization agencies, QA agencies that either the board has worked with that we can vouch for, and the no are good, and we are constantly making introductions and making recommendations to the developers that we're working with.
Yeah,
for sure.
Oh, that's great. You mentioned about prototyping funding would be really valuable in making sure that more diverse voices get heard. Are there any other things that the industry as a whole could be doing to make the industry make it more welcoming for people, for everybody?
I think you're looking at I think the investors need to be more diverse themselves. I think that is the number one thing that we were looking at. I think we sort of start off by saying, let's get the characters in games be more diverse and have like women as like a main character more often, etc. And now there's a push to have developers, the teams be more diverse. When you look at the assets under management by investors in the game space, vast amount of them are for like all male teams. I would say the majority are all male teams, and that's kind of what Wings is balancing out somewhat. And we tend to focus on more the indie side because there's a big gap, and this is true in the games industry generally and in the games market, where you can have very successful small teams and you can have sort of AAA successes, and there's some really there are some outstanding developers who are women who are from underrepresented backgrounds. But like in the middle, there's not so much need. I actually recently did a analysis together. I helped facilitate an analysis of the games market of 2020, first half of 2020. I found that most of the game revenues on Steam, like 1/3 were made by teams of less than 50, and then the other 2/3 were made by teams of over 100. And then like teams between 50 and 100 people were, they only took about 4 or 5% of contribution. The games made by those teams were made only like 4 or 5% of the total revenues made by the top successful games. So yeah, you see like on the indie side, there's a lot of, you don't really need to actually have huge amounts of money to be successful. You need to be very creative and innovative, and hit a lot of like bars in terms of quality, but you're not competing in the same space as the AAA companies at all. The AAA companies are the shock and awe. Huge amounts of content, like amazing graphics that are really detailed. And then in the middle is like there's only really like specialist sort of like simulation companies and so on. Yeah. So
touch upon discoverability there. That's an important aspect of when games companies are pitching, because they need to say, how they're going to get their message out. What do you expect to hear when you hear from games companies? Do they need a marketing plan, or is it something they can say, look, we really need help here, which is why, we're coming to you?
So if they... this is a really hard thing to generalize because it really differs from game to game. And there's like a ton of really excellent independent marketing agencies that are a joy to work with and really can do a lot to push your game. I fundamentally think that the number one marketing decision that you're going to make is like, what is the design of your game? In terms of, and then depending often upon like the genre of your game or the design of your game, a lot of decisions will flow from that. So in some cases, like some game developers have been really successful without having a marketing agency, without having a publisher, but their games were super gifable. Like they would make really awesome gifs of the games that looked really fun and post it on Reddit and Twitter, and players would pick up on that. In other cases, it's going to be like, oh, that's a really interesting art style, like Cuphead. It varies greatly from game to game to game. So it's really hard to make a generalized statement on marketing specifically.
Yeah. I'm sure Cuphead, we've mentioned them quite a few times at this summit over the last couple of hours. We should be getting royalties, I think, for that game. But I'll just remind everyone who's watching, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat. I mean, I'm going to keep chatting to Cassia because I've got some questions I'd like to ask. Something I wanted to mention as well was you had a relief fund earlier on this year, which I thought was a fantastic thing because of COVID. A lot of people were losing their access to costs and things. So can you tell us how that worked?
Yeah, that's right. That was really driven to help indie game developers who not just had lost out on the opportunities suddenly to meet at GDC, the investors they're planning, but had actually invested a lot of money into getting to San Francisco to attend GDC and weren't able to get back those funds. And particularly we found like there's quite a lot of developers who the poorest developers from the poorest nations had like booked their tickets, non-refundable tickets, well in advance to get the cheapest rates, and then were really having a hard time. There were even like a bunch of Peruvian game developers who had arrived to San Francisco a bit early and ended up being stranded in San Francisco for 3 or 4 months while because the Peruvian government had closed the borders within 24 hours. It was a real panic for amongst the indie game developers when the GC was cancelled. It's like one of the first big cancellations that happened. It was like the first emergency in the games industry as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of distress. And what was really great and inspiring is that so many companies stepped up to help indie game publishers, and like Modern Wolf, like Raw Fury, to like big companies like Google and Facebook, putting in cash to help these indie game developers who are in distress. And we helped like over 100 developers to claw back those funds. And the kind of thanks that we got from these developers really were super touching.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it really helped a ton of people. I can't help thank the sponsors for GC Really Fund enough. They're great. And there was actually, because it ended up that some developers were able to get refunds, there was excess money left over. We were able to raise $270,000 and it ended up with $120,000 left over. So we're working together with Code Coven, which is an online boot camp that usually does like fantastic programs to help women, female game developers, or developers from marginalized backgrounds to help get a foothold in the games industry. And they are helping to set up the Elevate program, which is ongoing, which is helping divert these funds out to a lot of small indie game studios that have been affected by the pandemic, and just does like a monthly stipend with milestones, and that's they're really, it's fantastic, really fantastic thing that we've been able to achieve.
It's so great. There's so much kind of positive stuff is coming out of what is a very tricky situation for everyone. And it was things like that. When I saw that story, I thought that is just fantastic. That's just like the industry coming together, and having someone just being the catalyst to like, right, let's do something about that. And it's so great to see that happen.
Yeah, I think that it really shows like what the spirit of the games industry is like. Yeah. There really is this kind of collective feeling, and there's a lot of willingness to help each other out, particularly in hard times, which is really wonderful to see.
Yeah, it is. Just come a little bit back to investment and funding. One of the questions that I get quite a lot from games developers saying, how long will it take me to get funding and get investment? And this will very much depend on what kind of investment you're going for. A VC investment will take longer because they've got to do lots of due diligence and on your company and things like that. But what's the kind of time scale for yourself? From the moment that they sort of get in touch and then you start that conversation, how long before they can get the cash?
We're typically we have to be a bit slower than most because the first round is our board playing the prototypes and then having a meeting to discuss all the prototypes that have come in, and so they meet twice a month. So yeah, it depends on when you send in your application, and it will often there'll be like some questions from the board about follow-ups. So there can be quite a lot of back and forth. So it can take quite some time initially. And I think it varies a lot with different publishers and funds, I would say. And it also, yes, it's hard to narrow down exactly the timing, but cool. It can be very short for some and it can take quite a long time for others.
Good stuff. We've got some questions. So hi Cassia, if an multiplayer is already on the market as a discovery open beta, what are the KPI that you look at in order to back the project?
Oof, that was a hard one. Well, if it's already an open beta and you're looking for investment, it's going to be, I'd be interested in to know like what size of the investment is going to be. And that will, if you're asking for a lot of money and your open beta isn't doing very well, then it's hard to justify that. In terms of KPIs, that's really going to depend. I think I like to see as much KPIs as possible just because I'm a data nerd. The more information, the better. So,
Good stuff. I'll ask another question here about what's your typical structure of your deals? Is it recouping first and revenue share, that sort of thing?
So we what's really standard for us is that we ensure that we don't recoup 100% of our investment from the get-go, because we know that the developers will need income coming in as soon as the game is launched. So we often will just recoup at 70% or 50%. We typically we're competitive with the market in terms of our deal terms. We're not as our deal terms are not as aggressive as the standard publishers, because we're not offering those kind of extraneous services. We think it's more economically viable or sensible or better for the developer to be using agencies if they need at flat rates, rather than giving away more and more of their revenue.
Yeah, good stuff. I think we've run out of time there, unfortunately, Cassia. We're coming up to on the hour, but thank you ever so much. Can you let people know how to get in contact with you and with Wings if they want to apply for funding?
Sure. So the email address is contact@wingsfund.me, and if you go, the URL is also wingsfund.me. So you can go to the website at any time and apply. Just go ahead.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you very much for joining us again today, Cassia. That was fantastic. sorry that we didn't get a chance to go through all the questions there, but it's one of these things we just need more time.
I know.
So that's it. Thank you very much. And that's it for the special Gamesindustry.biz Investment Summit at MEGAMIGS, presented by Gamesindustry.biz and Investissement Québec International. A big thanks again to our partners Red Barrels, Stadia, Square Enix, Ubisoft, and the City of Montreal. A huge thanks to all our speakers today: Chris Petrovich at Zynga, Debbie Bestwick, MBE from Team 17, Lindsay Rothstall from Kowloon Knight, and Michael Chung from Magus Fund, and of course Cassia Curran from Wings Interactive. You can find out more about the fantastic MEGAMIGS program on the website megamigs.com. That's it. Thanks, and see you all again soon. Cheers.